Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, August 4th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about a poll that was released yesterday by a Republican internal pollster called On Message Incorporated. They do political polls, surveys, whatever they want to call it, and they just pretty much gauge public sentiment on different races across the United States. And the most recent numbers that they have released have shown some quite interesting results for the GOP because they have very contrary results in the same exact voting groups. To summarize the quick overhead, the Senate race there shows Mark Kelly ahead by 5 points, but on the same group of voters, the Republicans are favored by 2 on the generic ballot. Biden is down 12 points statewide, and just 21% of voters in this survey believe that the country is moving in the right direction. So every other number seems to be showing the Democratic Party in a bad position. Every other thing here seems to be telling us that voters here would entirely vote against any Democratic nominee that was put forth to them this November election. But unfortunately for the GOP, that simply isn't what happened. Looking at the results on the political environment part of this survey, you would immediately assume the GOP was going to do well. But as I said, Mark Kelly is ahead by 5. And 48% already say that they are going to vote for Mark Kelly, contrary to just 42% saying they are going to vote for Blake Masters. Just 1% of people say they lean Mark Kelly, 2% say they lean Blake Masters, leaving 7% of the electorate undecided. But with 48% of the electorate already solidified on the possibility of voting for Mark Kelly, he is the Democratic nominee and will be on the ballot this November, it puts the Democratic Party in a much more strong position than Blake Masters puts the Republicans in. Because 48 to 42 is a 6-point drop-off. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think that in a year like 2022, Mark Kelly wins by 5 points. I think you're talking closer to 2 to 3 points, as he won in the 2020 election. The undecideds here are more than likely going to break in favor of the GOP, but at what point does it no longer matter? If Mark Kelly is at 49% today, that means all he needs is about 16% of these remaining undecided voters in order to win the election. Blake Masters needs over 80% in order to win the election, meaning that he's going to have to win and court all of these undecided voters, and it has been done before. Don't get me wrong about that either. It has been done before by President Trump in 2016, has been done before by Republicans in 2018 and 2020, but Democrats have also done it pretty well. Mark Kelly is an individually strong candidate. I can't say the same about Blake Masters. I honestly was to say, if I was a Republican strategist looking forward and was able to have the primaries go the way that I wanted to, if I was this Republican strategist, my first choice would have been Doug Ducey, my second choice would have been Mark Brnovich. But the problem here is that President Trump took over this primary. Blake Masters, being this pro-Trump candidate, took over this primary. And the problem for the GOP is that voters in Arizona have already rejected this idea of Trumpism in the 2020 election, and there's nothing indicating that they won't do it again in 2022. Because it isn't just this one GOP internal pollster that is showing that Mark Kelly is ahead. On average, Mark Kelly maintains about a 9-point lead over Blake Masters. Even if we were to have some egregious polling error, Mark Kelly would still likely win this race. Looking back at past elections, there have been many cases where Republicans are overestimated in the state of Arizona. Most notably in 2018, when pollsters such as Trafalgar, which are meant to be the most reputable ones according to themselves, every other poll here showed that Martha McSally was going to defeat Kyrsten Sinema, except for one, Emerson College, which we definitely should take a look out for because they actually were very accurate in this Arizona governor's primary, was much, much closer than any other pollster there. They are starting to become a very reputable one. And not to say that they weren't reputable before, but much, much more reputable, I would say, amongst those who take a look at the results and take a look at the actual average and find that Emerson has been pretty much on track of things. But specifically in 2018, they were right, and every other pollster said that Martha McSally was going to win. The average here was that McSally was going to win by 1. She lost by 2.3. Now, this isn't to say that sometimes the polls don't overestimate Democrats. In 2020, we actually saw that as the case. Looking at it, Mark Kelly defeated Martha McSally by just 2.4%. The polls here said he was going to defeat her by 5.7%. So it was off in 2020. Don't get me wrong about that. But what I will say is that historically speaking, we have seen some heavy levels of, or not heavy levels, but minor levels of inaccuracies that slightly favored the GOP. And thus, sometimes the polls overestimate Republican support. In 2020, they were pretty spot on. Trump and Biden, 0.9 versus 0.3. I guess you could say it's slightly overestimated President Biden's support. They also did a slight overestimation of Trump's support in 2016. So really, the presidential polls seem to be pretty accurate by the end of it. Seem to be pretty close, 4 points versus 3.5. Not really going to criticize there. But looking at 2022, what we're finding here is that even if it was to be off by the largest margin that we saw, which wasn't even 2020, but rather 2018, 3.3%. And honestly, this wouldn't even be, a good thing for the GOP because it was off in favor of the Democratic Party. But let's say we were to apply that to the numbers that we see today. I'm going to the wrong polling numbers here, but they will be important later down, the ones that I just showed you. 8.6% can't be taken down by 3.3%. That's not how this works. What happens in the state of Arizona now is that the Democratic Party is on track for victory, but they certainly have room to fall. But this nomination of Blake Masters and this GOP internal only confirms our suspicions that the Senate race seems to be moving beyond where voters believe President Biden is doing in the White House or the generic ballot across their state. This being a Republican internal showing Mark Kelly ahead by 5 means he's probably ahead by more than that at this point in time. And races can absolutely narrow down. When you saw the 2020 election between Martha McSally, one repeat candidate, it wasn't Sinema, it was McSally, and Mark Kelly, the early polling numbers showed a much more considerable lead for Mark Kelly. At different points in time, he was ahead by 11 points. At this point 2 years ago, he was ahead by 7 points, won by 2.4. But my point is that it can narrow down, and we can expect it to narrow down ahead of the November election, absolutely. But the way that it has narrowed down in years past hasn't been enough to convince me, or hasn't been enough to convince really anyone, that the Senate race isn't going to go to Mark Kelly in November. The generic ballot and the popularity rating for President Biden is something that I brought up because nothing here has ever indicated that Arizona was going to go blue. Maybe in early 2021, mid 2021, maybe late, depending on what you took a look at. The generic ballot made sense. The popularity rating for President Biden, not so much. President Biden is disapproved of nationwide by about 15, 16 points on an overall net negative. A very low point. You compare him to where President Trump was 4 years ago. President Trump had a higher approval rating than Joe Biden does today, at the same point in time in his presidency. The generic ballot, on the other hand, isn't showing nearly the numbers that it saw against President Trump in 2018 that we are seeing against Democrats in 2022. In 2018, the generic ballot at this point, I can show you. On August 3rd, 2018, the Democratic Party led in the generic ballot nationwide by 8 points nationally. What numbers they show today are the Democratic Party and the Republican Party even. And that does say the Republicans are doing 7 points better than where they were in 2018. But in 2010, by the end of November, they were up by 9. They won by about 7. Those are the numbers that we should be expecting to see for the GOP if they are supposedly going to have a red wave as strong as they did in the past. Even doesn't mean wave. It means mediocre year for both political parties. That's bad for the GOP. Being even when you have a president who is disapproved of by 16 points, and yet you can only nudge it over to even? That's what you're seeing happening in the state of Arizona. A very similar thing that we have been seeing happening on the national level for months now, which voters can be entirely against Biden, not willing to vote for other down-ballot Democrats, but in some of these more individual races where they know the Democrat, as you can see in Pennsylvania's Senate race, as you can see in Georgia's Senate race, they are more willing to vote for these Democrats, and doing so, they say so confidently in these polls. I mean, a 5-point margin amongst a Republican pollster means that this race is doomed for the GOP as of right now. It doesn't mean the Republican Party is going to lose the state of Arizona definitively, but what it does mean is that it's certainly not a good sign that they are on track to win it. Blake Masters was supposed to bring this new, youthful, revitalized voice to the Arizona GOP. And the only thing he has done is make this race less winnable for the GOP. Looking at the numbers on the political betting markets, and again, I won't say these are the most accurate, but generally speaking, people try to put aside their biases because they're putting forth a lot of money into these races. But looking at some of the numbers here, it really shows you where we thought this race was going to go back in May, June, July, and how really it has moved away from the Republican Party in the early stages of July and come to a point where now Democrats have a significantly higher chance over the GOP at winning in the state of Arizona. 3 months ago, Democrats had just about a 1 in 3 chance at victory, and today, that's 3/5. 60% chance at victory according to this. And taking a look at beyond the polling data, moving into the Senate forecast, Democrats have a 58% chance at winning and maintaining control of the U.S. Senate, largely in part to what they are seeing in the state of Arizona. These numbers here have changed pretty dramatically. Blake Masters and Mark Kelly never were in a position, according to 538, where Mark Kelly was going to lose. But what I will say is that the numbers here are not working in favor of Blake Masters at all. 32% when you are in a state that Joe Biden won by 0.2%. You can't even come close or closer to victory. 1/3 is a good chance. 1/3 is a very solid chance in maybe a lopsided state against the GOP. Having a 1/3 chance in, let's say, a state such as Minnesota or New Hampshire, states that voted for Biden by 7 points plus in 2020, to see a 1/3 chance is pretty strong. Republicans have about a 1/3 chance in the state of New Hampshire this election cycle, or 1/4 now. But in the state of Arizona, this is not some state that should be easily won by the Democratic Party by any metric, any standard, especially in 2022 of all years. If Democrats can survive with Mark Kelly in 2022, it means that the Republican Party screwed up. This is the Republican Party's automatic pickup. I say it's an automatic pickup because it should be an automatic pickup. So for them to lose it, it's not to say that Democrats had, and yes, I do applaud them for their strategy and their ability to turn around an unfortunate year into a favored one for them in the U.S. Senate, at least as of right now. And a lot of that has to do with the organizing that you see in the state of Arizona. But when it comes down more specifically to what is actually the problem here, the best organizing can be ran by the Democratic Party, but they could still very well fall short in some of these races just because of our national environment. Just because the generic ballot is being pulled 7 points to the right of 2018, and by the actual result or polls 4 and 7 points to the right of 2020. That's the difference here. The national environment is not beneficial. It's not conducive to a Democratic victory, and yet it's happening. And yes, Democrats can very well applaud themselves for that. But the GOP also needs to do some self-reflection. What was it about these Senate candidates that made them less likely to win than others? Honestly, think about it. Reflect. If you are a Republican or you are someone in strategy here, and obviously I don't expect them to be watching this video, but think about it for a moment. Why is it that Pennsylvania gives John Fetterman a 66% chance at victory in a race with a Republican incumbent? Why is it that in Georgia, Raphael Warnock has now overcome Herschel Walker despite being the expected loser of this race for months on end? Why is it that the state of Arizona has flipped in favor of Mark Kelly, according to a lot of the things that we have seen, because of who the nominee was? Why is it that Democrats have a 1 in 4 chance at victory in the state of Ohio and are expected to only lose it by 5 when they lost it in 2020, a year that was 4 points more beneficial for the Democratic Party, by 8? Why is it that a lot of these races are turning away from the GOP? Why is it that these races, such as Colorado, were competitive in 2016 and aren't competitive now? Look at this from a realistic point of view. Why is New Hampshire, the closest state from the 2016 Senate elections, up for re-election, expecting to give Maggie Hassan a margin of victory by 6 points statewide in a red wave year? 2016 being less of a red wave year than 2022. My point being, the GOP has really dropped the ball. I think they have had some strong Senate recruits in the past, but in 2022, I have seen very, very few. At most, I would argue potentially Joe O'Dea, because he's pro-choice, but beyond that, not much else differentiating him from the national GOP. Congressman Ted Budd in North Carolina. Even with this strong reputation, a 68% chance of victory means that if Pat McCrory, the voted-out governor, had won this nomination, he probably would be in more of a 55-45 situation, and Democrats would be in a realistic chance at victory in North Carolina. Nevada, Adam Laxalt. I think this is one of the last GOP nominees where I have really seen a strong one. In terms of the ones where I don't think they're as strong, Blake Masters, Herschel Walker, Dr. Oz. These are names that you recognize, and J.D. Vance too, because I don't think they're strong, and I think they are weighing down the GOP's chances. This entire video was about this Republican internal pollster showing Mark Kelly ahead by 5 points, and I think I really got to the point that I wanted to. Looking at this race from the level of where we are nationally, and then individualizing it between Kelly and Masters, and looking at the numbers that we have seen beyond this GOP internal, tell us that if a 5-point lead is coming from the same constituent group that is willing to elect Republicans by 2, willing to disapprove of Biden by 12, it means that voters here aren't exactly happy with their options on the GOP side. Because a generic ballot means they are willing to choose the GOP over the Democrats in a circumstance where it's a generic Democrat and a generic Republican, but these two candidates simply aren't that. Mark Kelly is a popular Democrat, and Blake Masters is an unpopular Republican. I think this race will be competitive by the end. My rankings of this race haven't changed much over the last couple of months, and the reason for that, and the reason why the last time I had it in favor of the GOP was in April, is because I started to realize Mark Brnovich wasn't going to win this election. Looking at the early stages of Arizona, I was more apprehensive at different points because I thought Doug Ducey would enter into the race. After the November election in which Glenn Youngkin won, I was also apprehensive that Mark Kelly would win this race. But now I am more confident of it. I'm more confident of it because of who the Republicans decided to nominate and where the direction of this country seems to be taking both political parties, moving it away from what was a Republican lead for the past 8 months consecutively to now a tie. The generic ballot is getting close. Joe Biden's approval rating isn't changing that much, but is still narrowly increasing. And the chances for Senate Democrats are increasing. This is happening for a reason, and Republicans should really be doing a lot of self-reflection. This Republican internal poll really should be a warning sign, a red flag for the GOP, that a race that was otherwise so easily winnable is now slowly becoming out of reach for the AZ GOP and the National Republicans' chances at winning Senate control. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.